I'm Emma, 28, female, single, and according to family, black sheep. I guess I've always been the odd one out. My siblings are married with kids, while I've focused on my career and building a life I'm proud of. That's not to say I don't love my family. For years, we've had this tradition of renting a big, fancy beach house every summer. It's always been a highlight of year, full of laughter, bonfires, and way too much food. It's one few things that really brought us all together, despite our differences. This year, though, things took a turn for the weird. A couple months ago, the family group chat lit up with talk of vacation planning. My mom dropped a message about trying something new this year. A voting system to decide who would join the trip. At first, thought a joke. I mean, who votes on family vacations? But no, it was serious. The idea was that everyone would anonymously vote on who they thought added the most value to trip. My mom framed it as a way to make the vacation fairer, whatever that meant. I didn't love it, but figured it was just another one of those quirky family things. We've always had bit tension, me being the odd one out all, but I wasn't too worried. I've always contributed. I help with rental costs, clean up, and my part. Plus, I'm family. I assumed that counted for something. Things started to feel off almost immediately. The group chat, which had always been buzzing with everyone's plans and jokes, got weirdly quiet. Details about the trip, like who was booking the house or which week we'd going, started trickling in through private messages instead of chat. At first, I thought was just being paranoid, but overheard my mom on call, casually mentioning the poll results and laughing. That was the first time it really hit me. This wasn't just some harmless fun. This was serious. About 2 weeks before the trip, I got text from my older sister. It wasn't even a call, just a message saying, "Hey, so the votes are in and you're not coming this year." Sorry. That was it. No explanation. No room for discussion. Just sorry. Ugh. When finally got her on the phone, the reasoning she gave was almost laughable. Apparently, I didn't contribute enough to last year's trip. No kids, no partner, and I didn't help cook much, though that's because I was cleaning up after everyone else. They decided I wasn't valuable enough addition to group, and that was that. My parents backed it up, calling it democratic and acting like it was no big deal. I furious. I've never asked for special treatment. I've always paid my share and done what I could. But apparently, that didn't count for much and system rigged to favor my siblings. When I tried to talk to parents about, they brushed me off, saying the decision was final, and I needed to respect the family vote. I was hurt, but more than that, angry. And that's I noticed something interesting. While sulking at home, scrolling through Airbnb listings, because apparently I now had free week on hands, I stumbled across a very familiar house. My parents' house. They listed it on Airbnb to help cover the costs of vacation. That wasn't surprising. They'd done it before. But what caught my attention was the calendar. They'd forgotten to block off the week of trip. The house was still available to book. An idea hit me like a lightning bolt. I could sit around feeling sorry for myself. Or I could do something. Using a fake name and prepaid card, I booked the house for exact dates they'd gone. The Airbnb policies meant that last-minute cancellations would leave them scrambling to find another renter. But wasn't my problem. I had every right to book a house that was listed as available. I didn't tell anyone what was doing, course. Instead, I left a quick, cryptic message in family group chat, "Have fun on trip. I'll find a keep busy." As soon as reservation was confirmed, I started making plans. I wasn't going to trash the place or do anything reckless. I'm that kind of person. But were going to exclude me from the vacation, I figured I might as well enjoy my time off. It was their house, after all. And they'd made clear they didn't need me around. It wasn't just about getting back at them, though. This was about showing them that wouldn't just sit quietly and accept being pushed aside. If they didn't value me as part of family, fine. I'd find own way to good time. And that's I ended up planning a very different kind of vacation, one that changed everything. Update 1. The morning of Airbnb check and felt surreal. I pulled up parents' house. Keys in hand, technically a paying guest in place where grew up. The irony wasn't lost on me. The listing had instructions for a key box by front door. I followed them to a T step. Inside, like I was entering someone else's world. Everything was just as I remembered. My mom's floral couch. The framed pictures of siblings' weddings. The faint smell of lavender from the diffuser my mom insisted on using year-round. I set my bags down and did quick walkthrough of house. I took photos of every room, every corner, every surface. I knew how this family operated. If anything was out of place when got back, it'd somehow be my fault. The documentation wasn't just a precaution, it necessity. Satisfied I'd covered my bases, I settled in. My first call was to a couple close friends. Pack an overnight bag, I told them. We're having a staycation. I made it clear this wasn't some wild house party. Respect the space, leave it clean, just enjoy the luxury my family seemed to think I didn't deserve. By the evening, my friends arrived with bags of snacks, drinks, and wide eyes at situation I'd pulled off. The kitchen became our first order of business. I rarely cook at home. My apartment's tiny kitchen isn't exactly inspiring, but this was different. My parents' house had fully stocked kitchen, complete with high-end appliances. We whipped up a feast. Grilled steaks, roasted veggies, and chocolate lava cake for dessert. It was the kind of meal that felt like a small rebellion. Later, while cleaning up, wandered into the living room and noticed a stack of photo albums on bottom shelf of bookshelf. Curiosity got the better of me. As I flipped through the pages, I saw snapshots of family vacations from years past. My siblings and their kids building sandcastles, my mom reading on porch, my dad grilling burgers. I was in some of pictures, sure, but not as often as expected. The albums seemed to focus on everyone else, highlighting their milestones. Memories. It like I was a supporting character in own family's story. Then came the receipts. Tucked inside one albums, I found stack of folded papers. They were receipts for lavish gifts my parents had given my siblings, high-end electronics, vacations, even a down payment for car. I couldn't help but notice the glaring absence of anything with my name on it. I wasn't surprised, but still stung. I set the receipts aside and joined my friends, cracking jokes about how I living my best life in house they tried to fund by kicking me out. The next morning, a neighbor stopped by. She was delivering a package that'd been left at house by mistake. When she saw me at the door, her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, I thought the family was on vacation," she said. I explained that was renting the place for a week, which led to laughing and shaking her head. "I always thought that boating thing was ridiculous," she muttered before handing me box and walking off. That comment stuck with me. So, the neighbors knew about the voting system? How much else did they know? The staycation was going perfectly until one of friends posted an Instagram story. It was an innocent clip of us laughing in kitchen, but background gave it away. My sister, who apparently checks social media like it's her job, saw the post within an hour. She called immediately. Her voice was sharp, accusing me of ruining the vacation vibe by being petty. I calmly pointed out that I'd done nothing wrong. The house was listed. I rented it. End story. My parents weren't far behind. They called later that afternoon, demanding to know why I in their house. I reminded them at Airbnb. And as far as Airbnb was concerned, I was a guest. I wasn't breaking any rules. They tried to guilt me into leaving, but stood my ground. The cherry on top came when my brother texted me, calling me childish and saying I was making things harder for everyone. I couldn't resist firing back. "At least I didn't vote you out of family." He didn't reply after that. My friends were rock through all of this. They kept reminding me that what I'd done wasn't just justified. It was brilliant. It wasn't about being petty. It about showing my family that their actions had consequences. By the time the week was halfway over, I started noticing something odd. I'd always known my family's finances were a little strange, but being in-house gave me front row seat to some of inconsistencies. There were clues everywhere: old bills, notes scribbled on calendars, bank statements left in drawer. It like pieces of puzzle were scattered around, just waiting to put together. That's it hit me, this wasn't just about the vacation. There was something deeper going on here. And for first time in years, I felt like was in position to finally figure it out. Update 2. I checked out parents' house day before they were scheduled to return. I made sure everything was spotless, floors vacuumed, counters wiped, and even the fridge cleaned out. I'd taken pictures of every room before I left, just in case. If they were going to accuse me of anything, I'd ready. I even left a polite note on counter: "Thanks for the stay, hope the house treated you well." The silence started the moment they got home. The group chat, usually filled with updates about everyone's lives, was dead. No one messaged me, and didn't reach out either. A couple days later, I heard from a mutual friend that my parents were furious, but didn't know how to confront me without admitting they'd listed their house on Airbnb. It didn't take long for fallout to spread. My siblings, apparently taking cues from my parents, started telling extended family that I'd done this to spite everyone. The funniest part? I wasn't only one been excluded by this ridiculous voting system. My cousin reached out, unexpectedly, after hearing what had happened. She'd left out past family events in similar way. Only hers wasn't about vacations. It was weddings and holiday dinners. Apparently, this voting system wasn't new. It was just the first time it'd been formalized. She told me that it always felt like a subtle way to save money. Fewer people meant fewer expenses, and seemed like my parents were using the system to manage costs, without actually saying it. That conversation made me dig deeper. I still had access to a few financial records from when we'd shared costs for past vacations. What found left me stunned. My parents had been charging me extra for years. While my siblings had received family discounts, I'd been paying full price, or more. My contributions had subsidized their stays, and I hadn't even realized it. I couldn't let go. I wrote an email to my parents, carefully outlining everything I'd found. I explained how hurtful it was to realize I'd treated differently, and included screenshots of discrepancies. I also mentioned the receipts I'd found for gifts they'd given my siblings, but not me. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just wanted to make it clear that I knew the truth. Their response was predictable. They didn't deny the financial inconsistencies, but framed the whole situation as misunderstanding. According to them, the voting system was meant to encourage participation, and wasn't about excluding me. They completely sidestepped the part about the extra charges. Instead, they painted me as overly sensitive, and implied I was overreacting. The email sparked more drama than expected. One extended family members got wind of situation, and reached out to me. She'd heard about the voting system, and appalled. She shared my email with few others. And before I knew it, the story was spreading. It didn't help that the neighbors had started gossiping too. One of them, the same one who'd mentioned the voting system, was ridiculous, told another neighbor about my Airbnb booking. Suddenly, parents' actions were the talk of neighborhood. For a touch of irony, I left a glowing review on their Airbnb listing. I praised the cleanliness, the comfortable beds, and fully stocked kitchen. But ended at cheeky note: perfect spot for a family getaway, if you're lucky enough to include it. Through mutual friends, found out that my siblings weren't exactly having a great time either. They'd started arguing about who should cover more of vacation costs. Apparently, without me paying extra, they were realizing just how expensive these trips really were. It was oddly satisfying to know that my absence was causing the kind of tension. The most surprising development came from my youngest sister. She reached out privately and admitted that she'd voted against me, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't want to cause conflict with the rest of family. She apologized, which was more than I'd expected from anyone, and said she regretted the whole situation. The fallout didn't stop there. The extended family started talking more openly about how my parents treated me differently. People were noticing things they hadn't before, patterns of favoritism that gone unquestioned for years. Even my cousin, who'd felt excluded from other events, started speaking up. The more people shared their experiences, the clearer it became that this wasn't an isolated incident. By the end the family dynamic was irreversibly shifted. My parents were embarrassed, but refused to take responsibility. My siblings were too busy arguing among themselves to address the bigger issues. And me? I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. For years, I'd bent over backward trying to include, trying to prove my worth. But now I saw their behavior for what it was, unfair and self-serving. I wasn't to let their treatment of define my worth anymore. If wanted to keep playing favorites, that was on them. I had my friends, my career, and growing sense of independence. This wasn't just about the vacation anymore. About reclaiming place in story, not as black sheep, but someone who wouldn't be pushed aside. Update 3. The week after I sent that email was eerily quiet. No one replied. The family group chat, which been buzzing with passive aggressive comments just days before, suddenly went silent. It felt intentional, like everyone was avoiding me. A few days later, my cousin, the one who'd reached out earlier, called to fill me in on what was happening behind the scenes. Apparently, my parents were embarrassed. They thought my actions, especially renting their house and sending that email, were childish. But instead of addressing it, they were pretending like it wasn't big deal. The cousin told me my siblings were even more divided. My older brother had taken to posting cryptic messages on social media, things like, "Some people thrive on drama and family should mean forgiveness, not pettiness." It didn't take detective to figure out who those posts were about. Then came the real bombshell from my cousin. The vacation voting system wasn't just about saving money, like we'd assumed. She had overheard my parents talking about it during a family gathering months ago. It turns out they thought it a good way to avoid complicated dynamics. In other words, wanted fewer people around who might stir the pot. Apparently, I fell into that category because I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and didn't fit into their idea of perfect family unit. It wasn't just about, it was about controlling the narrative. The more my cousin and talked, the more we realized this wasn't new behavior. Growing up, there were always little signs of favoritism. My siblings had bigger allowances, better gifts, and more attention for milestones like graduations and birthdays. Meanwhile, was always expected to just understand when things were different for me. It wasn't blatant enough to call out back then, but looking at now, it was obvious. After almost a week of silence, my parents suddenly decided they wanted a family meeting. They framed it as way clear the air, but the terms were very telling. The meeting would be at their house, on their schedule, and was no mention of apology or acknowledgement of issues I'd raised. It felt more like a setup than an actual attempt to fix anything. This time I stood my ground. I told them wouldn't attend unless they were willing to address the favoritism and the financial discrepancies openly. I wasn't going to walk into a situation where I'd ambushed gaslit into thinking interesting happened too. My youngest sister, the one who'd already apologized privately, started speaking, was the problem. My refusal didn't sit well. My older siblings doubled down on their narrative that was overreacting. But something up. She told me she understood my perspective and admitted that she'd been noticing the favoritism too. Having her support meant more than I realized, especially since it added more tension to family dynamic. Then came the financial bombshell. While going through some old files, I found a folder with even more receipts. These weren't just for expensive gifts my siblings had received. They were for the past vacations we'd all taken as a family. The math was clear. I'd paying significantly more than my siblings for years. My share of costs was inflated, while theirs was conveniently reduced. I took screenshots of everything and sent another email to the entire family. This was less emotional and more factual. I laid out the numbers and asked for explanation. The response was as vague as predictable. My parents didn't deny the numbers, claimed that everyone contributes in their own way, and the system had always been fair. They avoided addressing the specific discrepancies, and instead tried to frame the situation as misunderstanding. One of my siblings even admitted they'd known about the uneven contributions, but assumed I didn't mind because I never brought it up. Things escalated when my cousin decided to call her own family meeting. This one wasn't just for our immediate family, but for some of the extended relatives who'd been gossiping about the situation. She laid everything out: how the voting system worked, the financial inconsistencies, and clear favoritism. It like ripping the lid off a pressure cooker. The fallout was immediate. Some family members sided with me, saying they'd noticed the favoritism, but never felt it their place to speak up. Others tried to justify my parents' behavior, claiming it normal for parents to prioritize certain kids based on their needs. The divide was palpable, and felt like this was the first time anyone had openly acknowledged the unspoken rules that been running our family for years. By the end of week, family dynamic was in shambles. My parents were avoiding direct confrontation, my siblings were fighting amongst themselves. And extended family members were taking sides. For the first time, I didn't feel like the black sheep. I felt like person who finally called out the broken system. This wasn't just about the vacation. It was about years of inequality finally coming to light. And while the fallout was messy, I couldn't help but feel like it long overdue. Update 4: the silence from my family stretched on, but frustration of being ignored finally pushed me to take different route. I shared my story anonymously on community platform where people discussed family drama, unfair treatment, and complicated relationships. I laid out the facts: voting system, the financial discrepancies, and years of favoritism. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments poured in, most of them supportive, validating my decision to stand up for myself. Some people even shared similar experiences with their own families, which made me realize just how common these dynamics are. Word of my post spread faster than expected. A few days later, my cousin told me that my parents were panicking. Somehow, the story had made its back to them, though they didn't know it was me who shared it. Their main concern? Their reputation and community? My parents have always been the type to care deeply about appearances, so idea that people might see them as unfair or exclusionary was clearly getting to them. Around the same time, a family friend reached out to me. She told me she'd noticed the favoritism for years, but never felt it her place to say anything. She shared a few stories about times my parents had prioritized my siblings over me. Things I hadn't even realized at time. It was strange to hear someone outside the family validate what I'd been feeling for so long. Then my cousin dropped another bombshell. While talking with of my older siblings, she learned about a secret savings fund my parents had set up years ago. The fund was meant to help pay for their grandchildren's college tuition, but only included my siblings' children. Any future children I might have were excluded. When asked my cousin how she knew for sure, she said my sibling had casually mentioned it, assuming I already knew. When my parents eventually caught wind that knew about the fund, they tried to spin it as gift for the grandkids and claimed it wasn't meant to exclude me. But the math didn't lie. The fund was structured to benefit only my siblings' kids, and there's no mention of ever being adjusted if had children of own. That wasn't just favoritism, it was financial discrimination. At this point, my siblings started turning on each other. One of older brothers accused another of stirring the pot by letting me find out about the fund. The argument escalated, with one sibling claiming that if someone had just defended me earlier, none of this would happened. It a mess, and wasn't even involved in those conversations. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down on attempts to gaslight me. They claimed the fund wasn't personal and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But wasn't buying it. I decided to consult a lawyer. I wanted to make sure that if fund technically included all grandchildren, my future kids couldn't excluded just because of parents' preferences. After reviewing the details, the lawyer confirmed there a case to made if tried to exclude me unfairly. With that knowledge, sent my parents a formal letter. It wasn't threat, it clear explanation of expectations. If they wanted to keep the fund exclusive, they'd need to justify it legally. I made it clear I wasn't going to back down. This letter caused even more division in family. My youngest sibling, who had already apologized to privately, confronted my parents openly for the first time. She accused them of creating this mess by playing favorites for years and demanded they address the situation honestly. Her support meant a lot, but also deepened fractures in family. The once tight-knit group was now splintering, and my parents were clearly struggling to keep control. The gossip in neighborhood didn't help. One neighbor casually mentioned to that parents had been bragging about the voting system before the vacation. They'd called it great way to manage vacation dynamics, but now people knew how it turned out, tone had shifted. To add to their problems, I decided to update my Airbnb review of their house. This time, I left a more formal review. I didn't name them, but hinted issues with the hosts, mentioning a lack of fairness in dealings. Within days, I noticed their listing had fewer bookings, and my cousin confirmed that some potential renters had canceled. Sensing they were losing control, my parents finally reached out, asking to meet and talk things through. But wasn't about to walk into another ambush. I insisted on meeting at neutral location with a witness present. They reluctantly agreed. At meeting, they offered to repay some of money I'd unknowingly subsidized, but came with strings attached. I'd to stop sharing anything else publicly and drop issue of the fund. I declined. I told them reconciliation would only work if came with accountability, not conditions. After the meeting, I decided to shift my focus. Instead of waiting for family to change, I started planning my own vacations with supportive friends and extended family members who had reached out to show solidarity. I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I could create my own traditions with people who actually valued me. Update 5. After our tense meeting, I thought my parents might take some time to reflect on everything. Instead, doubled down. Days later, they sent a family-wide framing themselves as victims of my vindictiveness. They painted a picture of themselves as loving parents who had only ever tried to create harmony and blamed me for tearing the family apart. It was masterclass in gaslighting, but this time it didn't work. Their email backfired almost immediately. Several extended family members, who had quietly observing from the sidelines, started speaking up. Some sent private messages to me, expressing their support and acknowledging that they'd seen the favoritism for years, but had been too uncomfortable to say anything. One uncle replied directly to email thread, calling out parents for their behavior and expressing disappointment in how they'd handled the entire situation. He wasn't only one. Meanwhile, the voting system, the catalyst for this whole mess, finally came under scrutiny. Another cousin revealed that voting idea had originally been suggested years ago as joke during a holiday dinner. It was never meant to take in seriously, but parents had latched onto it as convenient way to exclude me without confrontation. The absurdity of all left my siblings arguing amongst themselves. One of them accused another of suggesting the idea in earnest, and finger-pointing quickly spiraled out control. While my parents tried to maintain their narrative, they were blindsided by an unexpected intervention. A well-respected family friend, someone they admired and often sought advice from, privately confronted them. She urged them to address the situation honestly before they lost me completely. My cousin told me about the confrontation later. And while I didn't expect much to change, it was validating to know someone else had stepped in behalf. Not long after, I received an unsigned letter in mail. It was an apology for vacation vote, vaguely acknowledging that it had been unfair and poorly handled. While it wasn't explicitly stated, the tone of letter hinted that it might have come from my dad. He didn't follow up admit to writing it, though, so I didn't dwell on it. At the same time, I decided to take one final legal step. After consulting my lawyer, I filed a formal complaint to ensure the family trust fund followed the legal guidelines that specified all grandchildren. This move sent ripples through my siblings, who suddenly realized that their own children's benefits might be at risk if my parents didn't comply. It created even more tension, but knew was the right thing to do. The pressure seemed to getting to parents. They quietly took down their Airbnb listing, likely realizing that their actions had alienated not just me, but also some of neighbors and community. My cousin later confirmed that the neighbors were gossiping about the whole situation, and parents were clearly uncomfortable with scrutiny. Amid all the chaos, life outside my family drama took a surprising turn. I received a major promotion at work, one that allowed me to focus on my personal goals and gain more financial independence. It was silver lining in otherwise tumultuous time, and gave me the clarity to prioritize what really mattered. The fallout from my parents' actions continued to ripple outward. Extended family members began questioning their behavior more openly. And their exclusionary actions became a common topic of gossip. My parents' carefully crafted reputation as perfect family started to crack, and could tell they feeling the heat. One of most unexpected moments came when my youngest sibling, the only one who apologized, reached out with an olive branch. She invited me to neutral family dinner to start rebuilding our relationship. She admitted that she had been complicit in some of favoritism, but wanted to make things right moving forward. It wasn't much, but was a start. Eventually, my parents issued a half-hearted apology. It was more about appeasing the extended family than genuinely addressing the hurt they'd caused. They stopped short of admitting the full scope of their wrongdoing, instead framing it as misunderstanding. I let them know that any future reconciliation would need to come with genuine accountability and commitment to treating me as an equal, not as an afterthought. With that chapter closed, I decided to focus on creating new traditions. I organized a trip with supportive friends and cousins, people who had stood by me through the drama. It was refreshing to spend time with people who valued and respected me for who I am, not for what could contribute financially or socially. Looking back, whole ordeal taught me more than I ever wanted to know about family dynamics and favoritism. But it also showed me the importance of standing up for myself and setting boundaries. I stopped chasing validation from people who don't see my worth. Instead, I'm building a life and chosen family that brings me joy and fulfillment. For first time in long time, I feel free.